They built the Great Wall. They unified China. They gave us terracotta warriors. But nobody talks about the dark side of Qin Shi Huang's empire. The imperial harems with thousands of concubines, the castration factories that produced eunuchs by the hundreds, the ritual sacrifices that buried living women with dead emperors, sexual control as state power, bodies as currency. Which stories are myth, and which ones lie buried in tombs and written in bamboo strips? 221 BC. The first emperor rules everything under heaven. His palace complex at Xianyang holds more than 3,000 women. Not wives, not companions, property. The Qin legal code treats them like livestock, breeding stock for the imperial bloodline, entertainment for the emperor's knights, and offerings for his afterlife. If you value documented Chinese history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from records of the Grand Historian and archaeological excavations from Qin tomb sites. Now back to the story. Start with the numbers. Grand Historian Sima Qian records that Qin Shi Huang's harem contained 3,000 women from across the 6 conquered kingdoms. 3,000, each one taken as tribute, purchased in markets, or seized as war prizes. The palace at Xianyang had 145 separate courtyards. Do the math, 20 women per courtyard, rotating schedules, breeding quotas. Imperial accountants tracked menstrual cycles on bamboo strips found at Shuihudi. The emperor never slept in the same bed twice. Palace records show he moved between courtyards, following astronomical calculations. Lucky nights, fertile days. The women waited in silk-lined chambers. Painted faces, bound feet, knowing that pregnancy meant survival and barrenness meant death, or worse. 210 BC. The emperor dies at 50 years old. Chinese law demands his harem follow him into the afterlife. Not all of them, the ones who bore no sons. Sima Qian writes it cold. All the childless concubines were ordered to accompany the emperor in death. The phrase in classical Chinese uses the same character for accompany as for sacrificial animals. Excavations at the Qin Shi Huang Mausoleum complex between 1974 and 2012 uncovered mass burial pits. Not just terracotta warriors, human remains, mostly young women. Carbon dating places them at 210 BC. Cause of death varies. Strangulation marks on cervical vertebrae, mercury poisoning in bone samples, evidence of live burial in sealed chambers. But the harem was just the beginning. The real horror lived in the eunuch system, castration as career advancement. Boys as young as 8 years old sold to palace brokers. The procedure happened in the Forbidden City's eastern quarter, a complex of low buildings where screams echoed day and night. The method was surgical. Records from the Han Dynasty describe Qin practices inherited by later emperors. Total removal, blade across the root, hot oil to seal the wound. 1 in 3 died from infection. The survivors became imperial property, neither male nor female, trusted with the emperor's women because they posed no sexual threat. Sima Qian himself was castrated for defending a general who surrendered to nomads. He writes about it once. The ancients would rather die than suffer such a disgrace. Then he spent the rest of his life documenting the dynasty that mutilated him. His records become our primary source for Qin sexual practices. Revenge served cold as history. The numbers shock you. Palace records on silk manuscripts from Mawangdui tomb show the Qin court employed over 4,000 eunuchs. 4,000 castrated men serving one emperor's sexual paranoia. Some worked as guards in the harem quarters. Others became administrators, their sexless state making them safe advisors who couldn't father dynasties to challenge the throne. But castration wasn't just about trust. It was about control. The Qin legal code treated sexual crimes with extreme brutality. Adultery with an imperial concubine meant death by splitting, the criminal tied between 2 carts, pulled in opposite directions. Rape of a palace woman meant castration followed by forced labor on the Great Wall. The bamboo strips at Shuihudi record over 200 cases in a single year. The emperor's own sexual practices bordered on ritualistic. Palace chronicles describe his obsession with virgins. Not just young women, virgin boys. The imperial bedroom contained bronze mirrors arranged in specific patterns to reflect sexual acts back infinitely. Taoist priests convinced him that sexual energy from virgins would grant immortality. He consumed it literally, drinking menstrual blood mixed with mercury and cinnabar. 212 BC, Crown Prince Fusu challenges his father's methods. The emperor responds by ordering his son's wife and children brought to the palace, not for harm, for his pleasure. Sima Qian records the prince's response. A ruler who takes his son's women rules nothing. Fusu kills himself rather than watch his family become imperial property. The emperor adds the widow to his collection. The sexual marketplace extended beyond the palace. Qin cities operated official brothel districts supervised by imperial magistrates, women ranked by beauty and fertility. Prices set by state decree. A night with a first-rank courtesan cost 3 gold coins, enough to buy a horse. Second rank, 1 gold coin. Third rank, 10 silver pieces. Below that, the price dropped to copper cash and rice wine. These brothel districts operated as state enterprises. Tax collectors visited weekly, claiming 30% of all earnings for the imperial treasury. Brothel managers maintained detailed records of client preferences, sexual practices, and payment methods. Archaeological excavations at the ancient city of Luoyang uncovered bamboo accounting strips listing over 600 prostitutes, by name, age, and specialization. The specializations reveal the depths of sexual commodification. Palace-trained women commanded premium prices for their knowledge of imperial techniques. Battle-scarred women attracted military officers seeking familiar experiences. Foreign women from conquered territories offered exotic practices unknown in Chinese culture. Child prostitutes, both male and female, served clients with specific age preferences. But these weren't just pleasure houses, they were breeding facilities. The state monitored pregnancies, claiming any children for military service or palace work. Boys became soldiers or eunuchs depending on their beauty. Girls entered the sexual economy. The most attractive sent to regional governors as gifts, the plain ones sold to merchants and farmers. The Qin legal code regulated sexual commerce with brutal efficiency. Unauthorized prostitution meant castration for men, facial branding for women. Operating an unlicensed brothel resulted in execution by slow slicing, death by 1,000 cuts administered over several days. Client violence against state-owned prostitutes carried the same penalty as damaging imperial property. Palace records show the scale of sexual taxation. In 215 BCE, brothel revenues contributed over 2 million bronze coins to the imperial treasury, roughly 10% of total state income. The emperor literally built his empire on commercialized sexual exploitation, turning human desire into state funding for the Great Wall and Terracotta Army. The Qin marriage laws reveal the scope of sexual control. Fathers could sell daughters to the state starting at age 12. The emperor's agents traveled through villages during harvest festivals, inspecting girls like livestock. Beauty standards included pale skin, small hands, and what palace records call moon face, round features that suggested fertility. The selection process followed strict protocols. Imperial inspectors carried bronze measuring tools, rods to check height, calipers for facial proportions, scales for weight. Women between 15 and 25 years old were classified into 5 categories. Category 1, imperial concubine material, flawless skin, symmetric features, fertile hips. Category 2, regional governor gifts, beautiful but with minor flaws. Category 3, military officer rewards, average looks, healthy bodies. Category 4, merchant wives, plain faces, strong builds for labor. Category 5, brothel workers or sacrificial victims. Archaeological evidence supports the written records. Excavations at Qin administrative centers uncovered bronze scales used to weigh women during selection. Standard weights and measures applied to human flesh. The heaviest women went to agricultural districts as farm wives. The lightest became palace dancers and concubines. The emperor's sexual schedule followed lunar calculations. Court astronomers created detailed charts matching his bedroom visits to planetary alignments. New moon nights for virgin encounters, full moon nights for conception attempts with proven fertile concubines, eclipse nights for ritual sexual practices involving blood and mercury consumption. Palace records from Shui Hudi show the mathematical precision of sexual scheduling. 3,000 women divided into monthly rotations, 84 women available per night. The emperor typically chose 3 to 5 for evening entertainment. None spent the entire night. Guards escorted each woman back to her quarters before dawn to prevent emotional attachments that might threaten imperial control. The rotation system created fierce competition among concubines. Palace hierarchies based on sexual performance and pregnancy rates. First-rank concubines received silk clothing, private chambers, and personal servants. Fifth-rank concubines shared rooms, wore rough cotton, and ate leftover food from higher ranks. Failure to conceive within 2 years meant demotion or worse, but pregnancy brought its own horrors. The emperor demanded proof of paternity through increasingly bizarre methods. Pregnant concubines consumed mercury-laced wine to purify the unborn child's blood. Miscarriages were common. Live births often produced children with severe deformities from mercury poisoning. Palace physicians called these birth defects dragon marks, signs of imperial favor. The emperor's search for immortality drove increasingly bizarre sexual practices. Taoist alchemists convinced him that virgin blood contained life essence. Palace records describe monthly collections. Young women bled into bronze vessels, their blood mixed with mercury and consumed during full moons. Many died from blood loss. The survivors faced a worse fate. The bleeding ceremonies followed precise rituals. Virgin concubines were suspended from silk ropes in the palace's eastern tower. Bronze knives made shallow cuts on their arms and legs. Palace servants collected the blood in vessels carved with dragon motifs. The ceremony lasted 3 hours during each full moon. Medical analysis of bone samples from Qin tombs shows severe anemia in young female skeletons, evidence supporting these bloodletting practices. Mercury poisoning created sexual dysfunction in the emperor's later years. Palace physicians prescribed increasingly desperate remedies. Ground rhinoceros horn mixed with young boys, urine, live fish inserted into the rectums of teenage girls, then consumed after removal. Sexual acts performed while standing in pools of heated mercury vapor. The emperor's declining health intensified his sexual paranoia. Palace records describe elaborate spy networks monitoring concubine behavior. Eunuchs reported conversations, tracked menstrual cycles, and noted which women showed signs of depression or rebellion. Suspected pregnancy from unauthorized encounters resulted in forced abortions using heated bronze rods inserted into the womb. The Qin court developed sophisticated methods for preventing unauthorized pregnancies. Palace physicians administered daily doses of silphium, a now extinct plant from North Africa that functioned as ancient birth control. Women caught attempting pregnancy with guards or other concubines faced execution by drowning in mercury baths. Palace records document 47 such executions in 212 BC alone. But the emperor's greatest fear was homosexual relationships among his concubines. He believed lesbian encounters stole sexual energy meant for the imperial bloodline. Palace guards conducted random inspections of women's quarters, searching for evidence of intimate relationships. Suspected couples were separated and forced to watch each other's torture as punishment. The emperor's death interrupted none of this. His son, the second emperor, inherited the harem and expanded it. Palace records show he added 800 new women in his first year. The eunuch system grew to 6,000 castrated men. The sexual marketplace doubled in size, but his reign lasted only 3 years before rebellion tore the dynasty apart. The second emperor's sexual practices exceeded even his father's cruelty. Palace chronicles describe his obsession with twins, both male and female. Imperial agents scoured the empire seeking twin births, offering families substantial payments for their children. The twins were raised in palace isolation, trained exclusively for the emperor's pleasures, and killed after their 18th birthday to prevent them from aging. The rebellion against Qin rule began in brothel districts. Prostitutes provided intelligence networks for rebel communications. Former concubines who escaped palace slavery became rebel leaders, their intimate knowledge of imperial weakness guiding military strategy. Chen Sheng, the rebellion's first leader, was the son of a palace prostitute and unknown client, possibly the first emperor himself. Palace security cracked down brutally on sexual rebellion. Mass executions eliminated suspected sympathizers among concubines and eunuchs. The second emperor ordered the drowning of 300 palace women in a single day, convinced they were communicating with rebel forces. Their bodies were dumped in the Wei River, creating a dam of corpses that disrupted water flow to downstream cities. As rebel armies approached Xianyang, the imperial sexual system collapsed into chaos. Concubines murdered their guards and attempted to escape. Eunuchs revolted, killing palace administrators who had ordered their castrations decades earlier. Brothel workers burned their establishments rather than serve a new emperor. The sexual apparatus that had sustained Qin power for 15 years disintegrated in weeks. When the Qin dynasty fell in 206 BC, the sexual apparatus collapsed with it. The Han general who conquered Xianyang found the palace complex empty. 3,000 women had vanished. Some fled. Others were killed by retreating Qin forces. Many took their own lives rather than face capture. Excavations in the 1990s uncovered evidence of this final horror. A mass grave near the palace contained over 400 female skeletons, all aged between 15 and 30. Cause of death: poisoning. Chemical analysis of bone samples revealed mercury, the same mercury the emperor consumed for immortality, repurposed as a tool for mass suicide. But the darkest discovery came in 2008. Archaeologists working on a subway expansion in Xi'an uncovered a sealed chamber beneath what was once the palace district. Inside, 37 mummified women in silk burial shrouds, perfectly preserved by mercury vapor. Carbon dating confirmed they died in 206 BC, the year the dynasty fell. The women's faces showed no signs of struggle. Their hands were folded peacefully over their chests. But forensic analysis revealed the truth. They had been sealed alive in the chamber, left to suffocate slowly as the Qin Empire burned above them. The last victims of a sexual system that treated human beings as objects for over 15 years. On the chamber wall, archaeologists found a message scratched in ancient Chinese characters. 4 words that summarized the entire horrific system: we belong to heaven. Even in death, these women couldn't escape the imperial fiction that had enslaved them. Their bodies became the emperor's property in life. Their souls were promised to serve him in the afterlife. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years, but its sexual practices influenced Chinese imperial culture for over 2,000 years. Every dynasty that followed maintained harems, employed eunuchs, and treated women's bodies as state resources. The system Qin Shi Huang created didn't die with him. It became the template for imperial sexual control across East Asia. Today, tour guides at the Terracotta Army Museum focus on military might and architectural achievement. They don't mention the mass graves of concubines buried alive. They don't explain why so many human skeletons surround the emperor's tomb. They don't talk about the chambers full of women who died for one man's fantasy of immortal power. But the bones don't lie. Neither do the bamboo records or the bronze scales or the mercury-poisoned remains in sealed chambers. The most horrifying sexual practices of Qin Shi Huang's China weren't legends or propaganda. They were documented, systematic, and utterly real. 3,000 women waiting in silk chambers for their turn in the emperor's bed, 400 skeletons in a mass grave, 37 mummified bodies sealed alive in an underground tomb. The emperor achieved immortality after all, not through sexual magic or mercury elixirs, but through the archaeological evidence of his crimes. Every excavation reveals new horrors. Every tomb tells another story of sexual slavery disguised as imperial glory. The first emperor rules forever as history's most documented sexual predator. Cold stone, silent bones, eternal shame.